old man was arrested for fixing watches at a bus stop. 72 hours later, the Pentagon sent an emergency telegram to the courthouse, and that homeless man stood atop the Capitol building as 25 veterans rose to salute him in silence. Who was Arthur Vance, really? And why was his file sealed for over 2 decades? You're about to hear a story the government once tried to forget. But America must never be allowed to.
Welcome to TNM Incredible Story. Let's uncover what really happened.
Arthur Vance was a man most people passed without a second glance. He wasn't homeless in the way you'd expect. He didn't carry signs or ask for change. His clothes were old but clean, and his posture, despite his age, remained surprisingly upright. Every morning at exactly 6:45 a.m., Arthur arrived at the same spot. Beneath a rusting green bus stop, shelter on Meeting Street in Charleston, South Carolina, he carried a small foldable stool, a wooden crate, and an old leather toolkit that looked like it had traveled through half a century of storms. With quiet routine, he would open the case, take out a magnifying lens, and unfold a handwritten cardboard sign. Mechanical watch repair, pay what you can. He never raised his voice, never solicited customers. He simply sat, bent over timepieces that others had long given up on, and brought them back to life, gear by gear, spring by spring. Arthur was 73 years old. His hair was silver, his face sun-lined and weathered, his eyes a dull green, had the kind of stillness found in men who had once lived through chaos. He wore the same olive-drab army jacket every day, its fabric faded and patched at the elbow, the rank insignia long removed. Locals knew him as Mr. Vance. They didn't know much else. He never spoke of his past, never bragged or complained. But over the years, people began to trust him. A retired teacher brought him an old Seiko her father wore in Vietnam. A young woman brought a 1950s Omega, a gift from a grandfather who'd passed. Arthur took each watch with reverence, often returning it fully functional in a day or two, with no price tag attached. If someone paid him $5, he nodded. If they paid nothing, he nodded the same way. One bakery owner offered to bring him lunch every day. Arthur politely declined, saying, "I eat what I earn. That's enough." When a local church tried to give him a new table and umbrella, he accepted the umbrella, but not the table. "Some things are meant to stay small," he said with a rare smile. But what struck people most were his hands, scarred, calloused, veined with age, but steady. In the middle of honking cars, barking dogs, and buzzing phones, Arthur's hands never trembled. And while he fixed broken watches, no one knew how much he himself had once helped keep time from running out for others. He was a man who lived with discipline, humility, and routine. But routines can be broken, and Arthur's quiet life was about to be interrupted. One Monday morning, clouds hung low over Charleston. The smell of rain lingered in the air. At 7:32 a.m., a black city vehicle pulled up beside the bus stop. A man in a bright orange vest stepped out, clipboard, sunglasses, stern face. He looked at Arthur without a greeting. "You can't conduct business here without a permit," the officer said flatly. Arthur didn't even look up from the watch in his hand. He turned a final screw, then gently set the piece down in a velvet cloth. "I'm not conducting business," he said calmly. "I'm helping people fix things that matter to them." "Doesn't matter," the officer replied. "You're still violating municipal code. I'll need you to pack up." "I've got 2 pieces waiting for pickup this morning," Arthur said. "Then I'll be done." The officer scribbled something on his form. "I'll give you 10 minutes. Then we escalate." Arthur nodded once. "Understood." But what he didn't realize was this morning's interruption wasn't just a routine violation. It was the start of something far greater. By nightfall, Arthur Vance would no longer be invisible, and within 72 hours, his name would reach the Pentagon. The rain had started falling in a slow, steady drizzle by the time Arthur Vance placed the last repaired watch into a soft velvet pouch. He zipped his toolkit closed, wiped the moisture off his cardboard sign, and waited. He had promised 2 people, Mrs. Sanderson, a retired school librarian, and Rico, a young delivery driver, that their watches would be ready that morning. Arthur didn't break promises, no matter how small. At 8:03 a.m., Rico showed up, drenched from the rain but grinning wide. "You got it, Mr. Vance?" Arthur nodded, handed him the package. Rico offered a $10 bill. Arthur took 5. That's all it's worth, he said quietly. The officer, still nearby, watched all of this, unimpressed. 8 minutes later, a woman with a plastic rain bonnet and shaky hands approached with a slow smile. Mrs. Sanderson. Arthur stood to greet her, offered her the repaired piece and carefully wrapped it in a dry cloth. She didn't offer cash. She offered a bag of cookies. Shortbread, she said. You mentioned once they remind you of your mother. Arthur allowed a rare smile. They still do. Just then, another officer arrived. This one younger, more rigid in posture. His name badge read Harris. The senior officer nodded toward Arthur. He's past time. Didn't move. Harris stepped forward. Sir, you've been told to cease activity and vacate this public space. You're in violation of city ordinance. This is your final warning. Arthur looked at him with the same calm he brought to a rusted gear. I'm leaving, as I said. I needed to return what was entrusted to me. The younger officer didn't blink. Sir, place your hands where I can see them. Mrs. Sanderson gasped. That's not necessary. He's just an old watch repairman. But it was already happening. Harris grabbed Arthur's arm. The toolbox clattered to the sidewalk. Velvet pouches spilled out. Small brass gears scattered across wet concrete. Arthur didn't resist, didn't speak. He simply turned to Mrs. Sanderson and said, Would you hold on to the cookies? I'll be back. Then they put him in the back of a cruiser. Charge, unauthorized commercial activity on public property. The city's legal system would have called it a routine citation, a simple fine. But Arthur Vance's fingerprints entered into the system. For the first time in decades, were about to flag something far beyond Charleston. Within 4 hours, a government server in Virginia lit up. A redacted file reactivated. A name flagged for national review. The name Vance Arthur E. Status declassified pending review. Clearance level Tier 4, Legacy Ops, Signal Command. Last known duty station. Undisclosed, SOCOM. Request immediate hold. Notify Department of Defense liaison. Charleston didn't know it yet, but they hadn't just arrested a watch repairman. They'd arrested a ghost from a war no one talked about anymore. Arthur Vance sat quietly in the holding room, his hands resting on the metal table in front of him. He wasn't handcuffed, and he hadn't asked for a phone call. He simply waited, patient, unbothered. By mid-morning, a court-appointed attorney offered to represent him. Arthur declined. I'll speak for myself, he said with the same quiet tone he used when fixing watches. At 11:40 a.m., the bailiff called his name. Arthur Edward Vance, courtroom 3. The room wasn't crowded, just a bored clerk, a young prosecutor with a backpack still slung over one shoulder, and a judge who looked like he was counting minutes until lunch. The charge was simple: violation of city code. 2108, operating an unlicensed business on public property. A finable offense, normally dismissed with a warning. But this case wasn't going to follow the script. The judge looked over his glasses. Mr. Vance, do you understand the charge against you? Arthur nodded. I do. Do you contest it? I do, he said softly. But not with argument, with context. The judge sighed. You may proceed. Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thin, wrinkled envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. He walked it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. This is a letter, Arthur said, dated July 12, 2007, written by Major General Gabriel Langston, U.S. Army, the original copy, not a reproduction. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. Relevance? The judge broke the seal, unfolded the paper. As he read, his expression changed from casual annoyance to quiet disbelief. The prosecutor stepped closer. Your Honor? But the judge didn't answer. He looked up at Arthur. This letter says you served with Signal Command, Special Operations Division. It references a mission in Syria. Operation Dustlight? Arthur nodded once. Yes, sir. The prosecutor scoffed. Even if that's true, it doesn't exempt him from municipal codes. But before the judge could respond, the back door of the courtroom creaked open. A young man, barely 30, stepped inside, wearing jeans, a wrinkled button-down and a press badge. His voice cut through the room. Sorry, Your Honor, but I know who he is. Everyone turned. My name's Daniel Cruz. I'm a freelance journalist. I interviewed a former Marine 3 years ago who mentioned a codebreaker named Arthur Vance. Said he saved an entire convoy in 2007 by cracking a radio intercept in less than 6 minutes. The judge leaned forward. And you're certain this is the same man? Cruz nodded. He described his hands, called them the steadiest damn hands I've ever seen. He said the man disappeared after the mission. No rank, no ceremony. Just gone. Arthur said nothing. He didn't need to. For the first time, the courtroom was silent. The judge folded the letter and placed it beside him. We'll take a brief recess, he said, voice lowered. Bailiff, ensure Mr. Vance remains in the building. No holding cell. No cuffs. As the judge left the bench, he paused, glancing once more at Arthur. There was something deeper at play now. This wasn't just a municipal violation. Something had been set in motion. And somewhere far from that small courtroom in Charleston, people in much higher places had already started making calls. By the time the judge returned to the bench, Courtroom 3 was no longer just another sleepy municipal chamber. 3 plainclothes men had arrived during the recess. Quiet, clean-cut, with Department of Defense identification clipped to their belts. They didn't speak. They didn't sit. They simply watched Arthur Vance. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, before we proceed, I've received a request from the Department of Defense to delay this hearing pending national-level review of your background. The prosecutor raised his voice. Your Honor, this is a city ordinance violation. I don't see how. You'll sit down and listen, the judge said curtly, without lifting his gaze from Arthur. Because this man's file just triggered a level 4 clearance alert. A quiet murmur rippled across the room. Arthur said nothing, but his eyes drifted toward one of the men near the back. The oldest one, a face he recognized, not by name but by the way he stood. Military long time, high rank. The man nodded. May I request my belongings? Arthur asked calmly. The judge hesitated, then motioned to the bailiff. A plastic bag was brought in, inside. The scattered contents of Arthur's toolbox. Magnifiers, spring bars, broken watch straps, and one small silver watch still ticking. Arthur lifted it gently. This belonged to someone important, he said, more to himself than anyone else. He flipped the case open, and for the first time the room saw him pause. Not from age, but from something deeper. His hand stopped midair. His expression shifted. Inside the backplate, wedged beneath the tiny battery housing, was a sliver of matte black plastic, no larger than a fingernail. An embedded microchip. Arthur looked up slowly. This doesn't belong in this watch, he said. This wasn't here when I gave it back last week. One of the DOD men stepped forward. Sir, I need you to step away from that item. Arthur didn't move. He stared at the chip like it was a ghost from another life. I know what this is, he whispered. It's a ghost drive. Encrypted rotating key protocol, modified for biometric failsafes. The entire room went quiet. The man nodded. You cracked that technology once. We'd hoped you still could. Arthur's hands, scarred and veined, gently lifted the watch, chip intact. Whose was this? The man hesitated. Then Agent Trevor Madsen. Missing in Syria, 2006, presumed killed. Arthur's voice was cold. He wasn't. He was running something bigger. He turned to the judge. This watch was brought to me by a young man 2 weeks ago. I didn't recognize its contents then. But this isn't just evidence. This is a message, something someone wanted hidden or found. Either way, it's not coincidence that it came back to me. The judge, clearly overwhelmed, said, What happens next? One of the agents replied, Next? Mr. Vance comes with us. Arthur placed the watch carefully into a foam case, then turned to the judge. With respect, Your Honor, may I have 2 minutes to collect something? Permission granted, the judge said. Arthur walked to the back of the courtroom, past the agents, past the journalist still scribbling in his notepad. He stopped beside an older woman seated quietly in the back row, Mrs. Sanderson. He bent down and said something only she could hear. She nodded, eyes misting. Then he turned, squared his shoulders, and followed the agents out the door. Not as a suspect, but as someone the government had just remembered they still needed. And as the doors swung closed, the young journalist stood frozen. He had come for a story about a watch repairman, but what he had found was a man who once intercepted death, and now held in his hands a piece of history no one was supposed to find. The vehicle that picked Arthur up from the courthouse wasn't marked. No sirens, no flags, just a matte gray SUV with reinforced panels and tinted windows. Inside, it smelled faintly of leather and old coffee. The man beside Arthur, Agent Markel, sat quietly, holding a locked tablet. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Markel said, "You haven't changed, sir. I remember your debriefs in Kandahar." Arthur looked straight ahead. Kandahar was 3 lifetimes ago. They pulled into a secure building nestled behind a gate outside Charleston. The sign at the entrance simply read, "Fort Dermott, Research Annex." Not even locals knew it existed. Inside, Arthur was led into a clean, windowless conference room. A high-ranking officer waited for him, Brigadier General Langston. Now gray-haired but unmistakable. Langston rose and saluted. "Mr. Vance, or should I say, Codebreaker V?" Arthur returned a nod but didn't smile. "I thought you were in Germany." "I was. They flew me in the minute." "Your name lit up on clearance systems. We forgot still existed." A man in a civilian suit entered, carrying a sealed file. Langston opened it and laid it in front of Arthur. "This is your file," he said. "Or what's left of it." Arthur scanned the pages. Most of it was blacked out. Years, operations, names, whole. Deployments redacted. Then he saw a line that stopped him cold. "Discharged, no benefits. Reason unverified clearance assignment. Status unclassified." Arthur blinked. "You erased me." Langston looked him in the eye. "Not intentionally. You were part of Ghost Thread. 17. Everything you did was above even Joint Chiefs review. But during the transition to digital archiving in 2009, someone mistagged your personnel status. The system flagged you as incomplete service. And no one noticed?" Arthur's voice was steady, but something in it cracked beneath the surface. Langston hesitated. "We noticed. But by the time we tried to correct it, your file was buried. You disappeared off-grid. No address. No contact. You'd made yourself invisible." "I didn't make myself invisible," Arthur said. "You just stopped looking." He stood, slowly. "I spent 14 years repairing strangers' watches because no one remembered what my hands used to do. I fixed time for other people because no one would give me the dignity of a moment of their own." Langston remained silent. Then the man in the suit cleared his throat. "We're here now to correct it. Retroactive full benefits, housing, VA medical, reinstated honors. And one more thing." He reached into his case and pulled out a box. Arthur opened it. Inside was the Legion of Merit and a folded letter, signed by the current Secretary of Defense, acknowledging a formal apology for unjust denial of veteran status and benefits resulting from administrative failure of classification systems. Arthur stared at the metal for a long time, then set it down. "I don't want a ceremony," he said. "I just want a bed and a hot shower." Langston smiled faintly. "You'll have both today." But as Arthur turned to leave, Langston added, "One more thing. That chip in the watch, it carried a names list, an old hit list, from a cell we thought was long dead, but someone wanted you to see it, which means someone knows you're still alive." Arthur paused in the doorway. "Then it's a good thing I'm not easy to find." 2 weeks later, Arthur Vance stood inside a quiet auditorium on a restricted wing of Fort Bragg. There were no flashing cameras, no news anchors, no podium draped in flags. The ceremony was classified, attendance by invitation only. 25 people stood in the room, generals, intelligence officers, and a handful of aging veterans who owed their lives to missions. No one outside this circle even knew had happened. Arthur wore a clean dark blue suit, not a uniform. He hadn't worn one since the day he disappeared from the system. But his shoes were polished, his spine straight, and his hands, those legendary hands, folded calmly in front of him. At the front of the room, a commanding officer stepped up to the mic. "We are here to honor a man whose name does not appear in our archives, but whose actions are burned into the memory of every soldier he saved." The officer paused. "Mr. Vance, your work in Operation Dustlight, Operation Tidehook, and Operation Scorpio intercepted communications that prevented more than a dozen planned attacks. You saved entire units, entire cities, and yet for nearly 2 decades, you lived in silence, forgotten by the very nation you swore to protect." A polished black case was placed on a velvet-lined table. "By the authority of the Department of Defense and the Secretary of the Army, we present to you the Distinguished Intelligence Cross and the reinstatement of full veteran status with highest honors. The room stood, not with applause, but with silence, a deeper kind of respect. Then a voice rang out from the back, clear and commanding. Attention on deck. Every man and woman in that room, from four-star general to janitor, snapped to salute. Arthur didn't move at first. He simply looked out at them, at the soldiers he had once supported from behind, a radio console buried under concrete, at the men who had once trusted their lives to the quiet calculations of someone they'd never seen. And slowly, he raised his right hand. The return salute was slow, deliberate, and final. A single tear escaped down his weathered cheek. Not from grief, but from weight, the unbearable lightness of being remembered. When the room was dismissed, Arthur stepped aside, removed a small watch from his pocket, and handed it to a woman standing quietly near the wall. It was the same watch that had restarted everything. The woman, Agent Madsen's daughter, looked up at him. He used to say you were the only man he'd trust in the dark, she whispered. Arthur smiled. He wasn't wrong. She handed him an envelope. He left this, in case you ever resurfaced. Side were coordinates, foreign, remote, and one sentence scribbled in sharp, careful handwriting. If you're reading this, they know you're alive, and they're coming. It had been less than 48 hours since Arthur received the letter. In that time, he hadn't spoken to anyone, not even the agents tasked with his re-entry processing. He had spent his hours in a government-provided apartment, furnished with only the basics. On the wall, a small shelf now held his medal, the old toolbox, and the same sign that once sat beside him at the bus stop. Mechanical watch repair, pay what you can. But today there would be no customers, no timepieces to fix. At precisely 4:17 a.m., Arthur opened the envelope again. The coordinates pointed to a remote safe house in northern Iceland, a location used years ago during Scorpio, a mission so classified even its existence had been denied under oath. He knew what it meant. Someone had unearthed the list inside the watch's chip. Someone had traced it, and someone, likely the last remaining cell of an organization, long thought defunct, was preparing to erase the only man who could decrypt what was still buried. Arthur wasn't going to run. He was going to finish what had started 20 years earlier. By noon the next day, he was on a military flight with no manifest, no uniform, just the tools he always carried and the watch, now reassembled but hiding a new chip inside. He arrived in Iceland under cloud cover and silence. The snow howled against the windshields. The safe house was as he remembered it. Stone walls, one radio tower, and a steel door with his old access code still functioning. Inside, he found what he had expected: a terminal, cold coffee mugs, a small cot, and a blinking light on a decades-old console. It was a message, not from command, from the enemy. It read, "We didn't forget you, Vance. We just waited for your time to run out." But Arthur Vance wasn't a man you waited out. He sat at the terminal, pulled the toolbox to his side, and began typing, blindly at first, then with focus sharpened by something deeper than memory: purpose. He decrypted the embedded signal, traced its origin, and launched a ghost ping across dark networks that only a few in the world even knew how to see. What he found was chilling. The last remaining agents of Aegis Null, a rogue intelligence faction once disbanded after Dustlight, had reactivated sleeper systems embedded across the Baltics. He had 72 hours to stop them. Arthur didn't hesitate. He typed. He calculated. He coded. He calibrated time. Epilogue, 1 month later, Charleston, South Carolina. The bus stop on Meeting Street now bears a new plaque. In honor of Arthur Vance, the watchmaker who silenced wars. He did not fix time. He gave it back to us. There is no public record of what happened in Iceland. No headlines, no books, only silence. But every year, on October 17th, a black SUV stops at that bus stop. A young woman steps out, places a small silver watch on the bench and waits. She waits for him, and somewhere, where cold winds bite the mountains, and time is once again ticking in the right direction, a man adjusts the gears behind history. Not for credit, not for applause, but because some things are meant to stay small, and some names are meant never to be forgotten.